Hello everyone, in this video we will study the difference between pure function and impure function. Now, if you're working as a front-end developer or a JavaScript developer, or if you're aspiring to become a front-end developer, then I must tell you that this topic is of utmost important. Now, if you think that this is a bit difficult to understand, trust me, it's super easy. So here what I've just taken an HTML and a script file to demonstrate you what is the difference between pure function and impure function. So, what is a pure function? A pure function is a function that always returns the same output when given the same input, and it does not have any side effect. So, for now, I would say just ignore this last line which says that it does not have any side effect. Let's focus on the first one, what it says that a pure function always returns the same output every time the same input is given. Okay, so this is very clear. For the same input, a pure function always return the same output. So let's say if input is A, the output will be always B. If input is again A, the output will be always again B, right? I mean, this is just an example I'm giving you. Okay, now let's see what is an impure function. Okay, so an impure function is a function that has side effects. Again, I would tell you that just ignore the side effect thing. We'll cover this later. So, an impure function does not always return the same output when given the same input. So, no matter what, even though we give the same input, it does not return the same output every time. So this is the definition of an impure function. Now, in a general term also, if I would tell you, what do you understand by the word purity, right? Purity means like you can just understand it in a way that it is pure, like it is very, very clear that, okay, it will always return the same output for the given input, right? But impure functions fluctuates, okay? Let's say you have put 5 in the output, it returns sometimes 10. Again, if you put 5, next time it returns 15. Again, you have put 5, but next time it returns 20. So, impure function is not like really same. It will not result into the same output, okay? So, let's get back to the VS Code and let's see some example of pure and impure function. Okay, so we are here. Now what I'll do, I'll just write a function here. I'll name it as pure. It takes two argument and const output should be a plus b. Let's say it takes two argument and then it is returning me the sum of argument, right? It is returning me output. Output is what? It is the sum of the arguments, right? And when I call this function, with two argument, let's say 3 and 4, what do we expect to get? We expect to get the sum of this 3 and 4, right? So when we call this function, we'll get 7. But right now we won't be able to see it because in order to see the result, we need to console, you know this. So let's console and now see it in our result. Let's refresh and see. We are getting the output as 7, okay? So let's call this function again and again. Let's call this 2, 3 times. Save it, refresh. You see, for this function, we are every time receiving the same output, that is 7. Okay. Now, let's take another function. I'll just remove these things. Let's take another function and I'll call it impure. This also takes an argument, let's say, and inside this function, what is happening? Total is equal to total plus val, right? And here we return the value of total, right? So what are we doing? We have taken a total variable outside this function, and then every time this function is invoked, the total is getting updated with the past argument, right? And then this function is returning us the value of total. So what do you think when I call this value with a argument 5? What do you think would be the result? Now, when we invoke this function, the total will become total plus val. Means the initial value of total is 0 and val we are passing is 5. So what the total will become, it will become 5, right? And then it will return as 5. Now again, we won't be able to see the result until we console it, so we'll just console it here just to see the result. Otherwise we can understand without consoling it. So now refresh and see, it gives us 5. Okay, now I'm doing the same thing what we did in case of pure function. I'm calling this 3 4 times with the same input. Now let's see if it returns the same output or not. Refresh. Okay, so you see that it does not give us the same output again, okay? Even though we are putting the same input every time, but the output varies every time, right? So, hope you understand the difference between pure and impure function, right? So, a pure function will always give the same output for the same input, but an impure function will not give the same output for the same input, okay? I hope that this was very, very clear, right? Now, let's get back to one more important topic that we missed out in the beginning. We were talking about side effects, right? So, we are back here and it says that a pure function does not have any side effects, okay? Now, what does impure function say? That an impure function has side effects, okay? So now we remember that pure function does not have a side effect and impure function do have a side effect. Now, let's understand what is side effects. So, in the context of pure and impure function, a side effect refers to any kind of interactions a function is doing with the outside world, besides returning a value. So, side effects can include a lot of things. It can be like modifying a global variable or external state, logging to the console, making a network request, altering a database, or a lot of things, right? Anything it can be. So, what basically a side effect is, I'll tell you in a simple word. If a function, apart from returning something, apart from returning a value, if it is also interacting with the outside world. Now, when we say outside world, anything that exists outside of that function, and if that function is interacting with that external thing, then in that case, the function is known to produce any kind of side effect, and that function is not considered as a pure function. Now, let's see in the code to understand the side effects. Now, what I'll do here, I'll write a very simple function again to understand the side effect concept, okay? Okay, so you see here we have a very simple function add, which is taking two arguments a and b, and then it is consoling the sum of the two arguments a plus b. Okay, so when we invoke, like when we call this function with any argument like 1 and 1, it gives me the sum of the arguments, right? So now tell me whether this function is pure or impure. What do you think? This function is impure or pure? Write your answers in comment. If you think this function is pure, write pure in comment. And if you think this function is impure, just write that in comment. What do you think? So in order to know the function is pure or impure, what we see that whether this function is returning same output for the same input or not. So let's call this function multiple times. Okay, we have called this function 5 times, and let's see for all the 5 times if it returns the same value 2 or not. Refresh it and see. Oh yes, it does return the same value, so we can easily call this a pure function, right? Do you agree? Okay, so here is a cake, guys. This is still not a pure function. We wouldn't call it a pure function. Why so? Because this function has a side effect. This function computes the sum based on the arguments passed here. But because of the console.log statement, because of this log statement, right? We consider this function as an impure function, right? Because logging is considered a side effect because it interacts with the outside world by printing something to the console, which affects the state outside the function. Okay, so whenever we write a console.log inside a function, it is actually altering, or it is actually affecting the state of the outside world. Outside world means anything outside the function. And Since this function add here is interacting with the outside world, which is the console.log, that's why we don't consider this function as a pure. But if in place of this we had returned a plus b, then we can definitely call this as a pure function. Okay, so now you got the difference between pure function and impure function, and also how side effects work, right? So let's understand one more thing. When we said that in case of pure function there is no side effect, it means a pure function should never interact with the outside world. If it interacts, then it is an impure function. So it will never ever ever produce a side effect. That is the identity of a pure function. Coming to the impure function, an impure function, it is always expected that it will have some or the other kind of side effect, because it will always interact with some or the other variables or log or anything of the outside world, right? Where the problem arises, if we have written a function and if we are considering it as a pure, but if it is still producing a side effect, so it means that a side effect was not expected there. If a side effect is expected, then it is totally fine, because you as a developer, when you are coding, you know that okay, we will get a side effect. But if you write a function and if a side effect is not expected, but still you are getting a side effect of it, then that becomes a problem. So that's why we need to understand the concept of side effects also when we are studying pure and impure function. Hope this gives you a clear clarity about everything, right? Some very basic examples of impure functions could be math.random, date.now, which we use every now and then in our codes. Let's see how math.random generates a random floating point number between 0 and 1. So each time we call it, we get a different result. Let's check here in console. We just call it and we see this 0.6, call it again, 0.3, call it again, 0.9 again, 0.3 again, 0.4 again, 0.4. So you see, every time we call this function, we get a different output, right? Same thing we can see with date dot now. 172 something. I mean, in order to check with the date, we check the last one, right? Here we have 41975465. Let's call it again. This time it is 4607. Call it again. This time it is 8719. So these are some real life examples of an impure function. Thank you for staying till the end. And if you have any doubts or confusion regarding anything, just hit me in the comment box. Thank you so much.